Welcome everybody to Entrepreneurs International Network. I'm Roger Killen. Entrepreneurs International Network is where entrepreneurs learn, network, and grow. Today, Janelle Anderson is going to be training us on how to use stories to amplify the impact of our marketing. Now, Janelle, I've got 3 questions for you that are intended for us to get to know you a little bit better, more as a human being than as a trainer. Here's question number 1. What is the wildest thing you have ever done?
Well, for me, this might not be that wild for other people, but the wildest thing I ever did was go to Haiti on a missions trip, and we went up into the mountains to build a building for them up in the mountains, which means you don't have electricity or anything. And it also meant riding on the back of an actual dump truck all the way up the mountain. And sometimes the road was like right next to the drop off. And we're back in the back of this truck, and the Haitians are playing drums on whatever they could find and singing. And it was just really a lot of fun. It was pretty wild for me.
Oh,
So,
wow. When
yeah.
did you do that? What year?
That was right when, 2000, it was right when the whole century changed and everything. It was the year 2000. Yeah.
Okay. Question number 2. What's the best decision you have ever made, either personal or professional?
Well, it has to be deciding at the age of 61 to become a coach and start a business. It was a struggle to do that because I thought, oh my gosh, am I too old? I should just maybe keep working my job and, retire and all of that. But I had such a passion to do it, and it was scary, but I decided to go for it because I thought, well, I could live another 30 years, so why not? So it was definitely the best decision I ever made.
So at the age of 61, you became an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, my third and last superlative, what's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome?
Well, it has to be, and I'll be sharing some of my story tonight, but just going back to a period of time in my life that I had tried to forget about and unpacking it, processing through it. I had been ignoring it for 30 years, and I thought it didn't affect my life, but it did. And it was really quite scary to do that work, but I'm really, really glad that I did.
Well, good. You've turned out okay.
Yes, I survived.
Survived. Now,
Yeah.
participants or attendees, please turn on your video. Uh, it gets pretty lonely, and it's hard to find energy from Janelle's point of view if all she is looking at is a bunch of black rectangles with names in the middle. So
True.
if you wouldn't mind, please engage with Janelle. Stay muted, and if you have any questions during Janelle's talk, please type them into the chat. I'll pose them to Janelle in the course of her talk. Rest assured, all your questions will be answered. Now, you're going to be sent a link to the recording of this workshop in a few hours, but I nevertheless encourage you to take notes, because the very act of taking notes is going to help you absorb more of Janelle's information. Janelle, are you ready to knock our socks off?
I am ready to go. Here
All
we
right, then
go.
share away.
All right, so tonight I'm going to share with you how to use stories to amplify the impact of your marketing messages. And so tonight, what I will share with you are several things, a step-by-step process that you can use to develop your storytelling skills. And we need to develop storytelling skills as entrepreneurs. So I'm going to give you a process. I'm going to give you simple strategies for finding stories that will work for you and your business. Often I hear people say, where do I find my stories? I don't know. Well, I'm going to give you some ideas. And then I'm going to give you a story structure template so you can take all those story ideas and put them into a structure that every story needs to have. And then we're going to talk about 4 very simple but powerful speaking techniques so that you can deliver your stories in a powerful way, right? So are you guys excited about that? All right, here we go. Woohoo! All right, so 6 words that we all love to hear. Let me tell you a story. We have loved stories since the time we were kids, right? Kids love stories, but so do adults. It's why we watch movies. It's why we go to plays. It's why we read books. It's why we listen to podcasts. It's why we go and read reviews before we buy something, because we're looking for the story. And so it's a skill set that as an entrepreneur holds so much value for you, no matter what it is that you're doing. And stories grab people's attention at an emotional level. And they are so much more effective than just giving information and just going through a bullet point list of what you do. Stories grab people at that emotional level, and they also bring the person in so that they can experience it, what you're talking about, and they can then see themselves in the story and connect with you on this deeper level. So it is a must-have skill for all entrepreneurs. So to start off with, let me tell you a story. One afternoon at the age of 23, I found myself sitting on a bar stool in a Las Vegas casino. I could hear the slot machines going off behind me, the jangles and the bells, and I could hear the music playing, the sound of people talking. Inside, though, I wanted to be anywhere else but sitting on that bar stool in that casino. I looked over at the door because I wanted to run out of there, but my boyfriend was standing there watching me, making sure I followed through with his plan. Soon a man sat down next to me. He smelled of cigarettes and booze, and he was probably as old as my dad. He turns to me and he says, "Are you working?" Everything inside of me was screaming, "No, no, no." But I said, "Yes." That was the first day of the next 3 years of being a working girl in Las Vegas, where that scene played itself out over and over again, hundreds of times, hundreds of bar stools, hundreds of men. I became a prostitute. I didn't realize at the time that I was actually being trafficked. I thought it was because I had let myself step into this lifestyle. And by the end of the 3 years, I hated myself. I thought I was worthless, and I thought I was trapped. I thought this was going to be my life forever. But miraculously, one night at the age of 26, January 1980, through a phone call, literally a phone call and a prayer with my mom, I was rescued right out of that world. And about a month later, I was home in Virginia, freed from that, starting my life over again. The problem was that I never told anyone. I kept it all hidden inside. And for the next 30 years, I ignored that part of my life. I thought, it'll just go away. It's in the past. It has no relevance now. But then in my 50s, I started to wake up to the fact that, hey, I'm in my 50s and life has gone by really, really quick. What am I doing? I need to follow my passion. I want to fulfill my purpose, but I keep running into this fear and lack of confidence and not wanting to speak up and not wanting to take a chance. What is that all about? And so as I began to look at that, I realized that my distant past was still having an effect on my level of confidence and my ability to speak up. And so I finally unpacked and processed through all of that, saw myself in a whole different from a whole different perspective, began to heal. And as I was going through that process, my confidence began to grow. And I started noticing I was speaking up more, and I was doing things that I'd been afraid to do before. And through that whole process, as I became a coach and began to speak and share my story, I realized the impact my story was having. And I realized that it was important for me to learn how to tell it in a powerful way, because it is my story of why. Your story of why you do what you do is super powerful. And as an entrepreneur, learning how to share that story of why are you doing what you do? What struggles did you have to go through? What did you overcome? Why are you doing what you're doing? It's a very powerful story. It's also important, though, that you learn how to tell it in a powerful way. This is how I used to tell it. I used to say, I'm a confidence coach for women entrepreneurs. I help them build confidence in speaking so they can have a greater impact on the world. I do this because there was a time in my life I wasn't confident at all. Due to some trauma and abuse that I suffered in my 20s, I was afraid and timid. But since then, I've learned how vital it is to speak with confidence and share my story. So I'm passionate about helping women do the same. That's one way to tell it, but which way is more powerful? Which one grabs you more emotionally and brings you into the moment and gets you attached or connected to me as a person? The first way. When I learned how to use those techniques that I just demonstrated, it was just like life-changing as far as how I connected with my audience and how they felt connected to me and how they could trust me because I had been through something and I knew how to bring them through something to the other side. And so these techniques that I'm going to share with you are things that you can learn. You don't have to be a professional storyteller. These are things that if I could learn them, you could learn them. Trust me. So stories are what I call sticky. You want them to be sticky because you want them to stick with people. You want them to remember the story. Stories draw listeners into an experience with you. Stories that are well told. They draw listeners into an experience with you rather than you just giving information. As I said before, they connect on an emotional level, and people buy on emotion. And then later they'll rationalize through logic. But it's the emotions that bring people to a place of making a decision to spend their money or to invest their money. And if you think about the times that you have finally decided to spend money, it was probably through a story and there was some emotional connection there that you saw yourself there in that story and you could see how buying that product or that service could bring you the solution and the outcome that that hero in the story had. Research has shown that your marketing messages that you're putting out into the world, whether it's through your website, through email, through speaking, your messages about who you are and what you do and what you offer will be 20 times more likely to stick if you use a story. This comes out of research, psychologist Jerome Bruner. So think about that, 20 times more likely to stick. So that's amazing. So you want to use stories. Another cool thing about stories is what it does in the brain. And I love neuroscience and I'm kind of nerdy that way. But they have found that stories trigger the release of hormones in our brains. And that's why we love to get caught up in a good movie or a good book. And first of all, cortisol gets released when there's tension and conflict in the story because, there's tension and conflict. So you're focused, it brings your focus in. And then oxytocin gets released or synthesized in the brain when you start to connect and identify with the hero of the story. Now, oxytocin causes us, it's that hormone that helps us to feel connected and foster trust. So it's that emotional, empathetic connection that happens. And another really cool thing, this Princeton University professor of psychology and neuroscience, his name is Uri Hasson, Hasson. You can watch his videos on YouTube. He did a lot of research on communication, what happens in the brain between people, but particularly when somebody's telling a story, he shows these brainwave diagrams. And he shows how at the beginning of the story, everybody's brainwave is kind of different. But as the story unfolds, our brains begin to synchronize with the storyteller. And so by the end of the story, everybody's brain was synchronized. So that connection is there. And that's what you want. You want to make a connection with your audience. So don't just tell them how you help them solve their problem with your process or your product. Show them through a story that will connect to their emotions and will show them the struggle and the eventual triumph. Because what you're doing is connecting with them on this whole other level. So I want to share with you 5 steps that you can use to become a great storyteller. Number 1, you need to find some stories, and you can find stories everywhere. And I'm going to share a little bit with you about that and give you some suggestions. Once you find your stories, you want to build them using some key elements of story structure. You want to have a structure so that you're just not all over the place with your story. And then once you have that, you want to polish it up. You want to make your story shine. You want it to stand out, to draw people into an emotional moment with you. And then you want to deliver your stories powerfully. So how you tell the story is just as important as the story itself. So I'll share with you some speaking techniques you can use and begin to practice and develop. And then, of course, step 5 is practice. Practice, practice, practice. And the more you practice speaking, the more you practice telling stories, the better you'll get at it, the more natural it'll be. And then you'll feel confident and you're ready to get up, and no matter what situation you find yourself in, you've got a story and you've got it polished and practiced and ready to deliver. And you don't have to like flounder around wondering, well, what am I going to say? What story will I tell? You'll have it because you've worked on it, you've polished it, and you've practiced it. So, finding your stories. The best place to find them is, like I said, in everyday life. But here's some suggestions of places to think about, or things to think about. What are some of the significant events in your life? I just shared a short story about one of mine. But it's those times in your life where a turning point happens. Something happens and there's a change. There's also teachable moments where you learned something that was significant and really made a change in your life that you could also pass on to your listeners in the story, or telling the story about, this one day, this thing happened and I had this aha moment. Conversations. Think about conversations, even conversations with kids, children. Like those are the greatest places to find stories to tell. Or conversations with your neighbors or your partners or your everyday world. The other day I had a conversation with the clerk at the grocery store and, what came out of that. Think about places where in your life where you failed, or you felt like you failed, or you had a big obstacle and you overcame it. That's a great story resource. The accomplishments in your life, what are some of the places in your life where you felt like you had a great success? And then metaphors are great for wrapping a story around something that really carries the picture that you're trying to convey. A lot of times I'll talk about gardening, as my metaphor about, my garden and how you plant the seed and the weeds and the water and you grow things. Like that comes into my stories a lot. Train on a track. I use that a lot when I'm talking about getting into motion, getting into action, get the train out of the station. So you can bring in metaphors into your stories also. And for like everyday bits that happen in your life, start thinking about those and writing them down when they happen. For example, just tonight, this would be a great story to develop for me. My husband wanted to really bless me and bring me some dinner because I was busy. And so he said, what's your favorite meal from the Mexican restaurant? So I told him, get me fried chimichangas, chicken with rice. And so he brings me this meal and he's very excited about it. And I open it up and it's like, it's enchiladas. It's not chimichangas. And he felt really bad about it. And he was like, oh man, let me go get you your chimichangas. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I'll just eat this. Oh man. And he's like kicking himself and beating himself up over it. And I was like, don't worry about it. It's just food. It's just a meal. But I could take that and I could use it as a story to talk about lots of things, like how to not make a mountain out of a molehill, or how to pay more attention to details, which he didn't do, Like I could use that story in a lot of different ways. So what I suggest you do is start a story bank. And you can just use your computer or a notebook, but start off going back through your past, your childhood, those significant events and teachable moments that I was talking about, and just start jotting down a list of things that could become stories. You don't have to develop the story, just a list of ideas, and then begin to look in your everyday. And if something happens, you have a great conversation, or you have like this aha moment about something, like you're walking down the street and all of a sudden something happens and it makes you think of something else. Like the simplest thing can become a story, and write it down. And then what you can do is go back and pick out like maybe 5 or 6 ideas that you would really want to develop that would be good stories for your business. So think about who you're talking to, who is your ideal audience, what would be a good story for them to understand what it is you do, or to understand why you do it, or to understand the solution that you can bring them. And so you can tell stories from your life. You can also, in your story bank, write down some stories from past clients or current clients, satisfied customers. And I'm going to share a story as an illustration from a client that I had. Those are great story resources. Always think about when you're putting together your ideas is, when you pick out your main stories that you want to develop, start writing down things like, what was the before picture? What was happening before? How was I feeling in the struggle? What was the struggle all about? What was the crisis point that, that everything just kind of like hit this wall or everything fell apart? And then what was the turning point? And what changed? And then what's the after story? So these are going to fit into the 5 C's structure that I'm about to share with you. So as you're putting together your story bank and you're culling all your ideas, be thinking about, what was that all about? What was happening? What was I feeling? What was the struggle? What happened to make me turn the corner, have that aha moment, and then what happened after? And as you jot down those ideas, you'll have the beginnings of your story structure. So every story has to have certain key elements. Every story has to have a character, and it needs to be a relatable character. It needs to be somebody that your ideal audience, your ideal client or customer can relate to. Then there needs to be a conflict. Without a conflict, it's just boring. How many of you watch a movie and there's no conflict and everything's hunky-dory and they're just tiptoeing through the tulips and you're like, John, let me get out of here. I'm going to change the channel. There has to be conflict because that's real life. And then the conflict builds and builds to some kind of a crisis point where the character is just like, it's just falling apart, one thing after another. And then there comes this moment of change, and then there's a conclusion. So think 5 C's. Take all your story material and begin to put it into this structure. So what I want to do right now is go through a story. It's a client story. And as I tell the story, you will see the 5 C's. And also notice if I am stirring up emotion in you. Notice some of the speaking techniques that I'm going to share with you later. And I'll break it all down for you. So first you need a character. Denise and I met one afternoon in a coffee shop in my meetup group. She was in her 50s and just had built this beautiful business, was very successful. She'd been married for about 20 years and they built this really nice life together. But she wasn't happy. Denise told me that she felt like she was living Groundhog Day. Everything was the same day after day. She said, I feel like I'm on a treadmill just plodding along and nothing's changing. And she said, I feel like nothing's working. I'm not getting enough sleep. My health is deteriorating. I'm gaining weight. And she says, I don't even like who I am in the mirror. When I look in the mirror, I don't even like who I see. And on top of that, my marriage is in a rut. It's like we're just roommates. There's no romance, there's no spark. She just felt old. She had lost her spit and fire, and her self-worth was at an all-time low. I mean, even most days when she did get dressed, she'd find out that her shirt was on backwards. She said, I just feel like there's this heavy blanket weighing me down. I'm just so depressed. She's just plodding along on that treadmill day after day, going nowhere. She got to this place where she just felt like, I just want to give up. I don't even want to bother to try anymore. What is the point? Nothing is working. That's where she was at when I met her that day in the coffee shop. Clearly something needed to change. And she decided that day, I'm going to work with Janelle as my coach. And when she hired me as her coach, things began to shift almost immediately. She felt this tremendous sense of relief. Finally, my life is moving forward. I've made a decision. And then after just 6 months, Denise's life had changed dramatically. She had a spring in her step and she had motivation and energy. She had stepped off the treadmill and her life was moving forward. She had a new job that lined up with her values and her passions, and her husband and her were talking and laughing again and going out on dates. So Denise made one decision that changed her life, and that was to say yes to herself. And you can make that same decision and get off the treadmill in your life. Would you like to hear more about how I could help you do that? So see, I shared a story that illustrated what I do as a coach through the story of my client. Rather than say, well, when I work with my clients, we meet every week and I give them assessments and we talk about their goals and we work together as partners and we work on their mindset. Like, I could go through my whole process, but that wouldn't have nearly the same effect as me showing it to you through a story of one of my clients. So
Now,
that's, yes.
Question?
Sure.
All right. This question comes from Summit. Does the story have to be true? And if your answer is yes, why?
Good question. I would say yes, because of authenticity. Now, having said that, like, if you want to be authentic, for me anyway, if I was just making up a story, I wouldn't feel that authentic, and I think I would lose connection with my audience. But you can mix stories together like a conglomerate that represents a typical client for you based on maybe 2 or 3 people you've worked with, and you're still showing what you do through stories. But it might be, 2 people that you've put together into a story. I've done that before. As long as I am sharing a true representation, of what I do through the results people have had with me, then I feel like I'm being authentic.
Kerry has chipped in with this question, and he says true stories are easier to remember.
Yes. Good point. Exactly.
No further questions for you. Back to you.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on to, once you've got your story into that structure, we want to polish it up, make it shine. So think of the acronym CSI. Cut, spice, and invite. First of all, most people put way too much into their stories. So you want to get out your red pen and start taking out extra words that really don't move your story. Look for the ands, the buts, the so, and just take them right out of there and just put a period. So, for example, when I'm telling my Denise story, I could have said, every day was exactly as the day before, and her life was a perpetual Groundhog Day. She plodded along on a treadmill going nowhere, and there was no vitality or excitement anywhere in her life, and nothing was working, and her health suffered, and she had no energy. So you see the idea? I'm just adding ands in there. And I'm making this really long sentence. But if I take out the ands and I just make it punchy, every day was exactly like the day before. Period. Her life was. So take out all the extra words and make sure that your words are moving the story forward and that they convey emotion and they really bring up vivid pictures. And you can spice it up by looking at the words you're using. A lot of us have pet words, or, there's a lot of words that are used over and over again, like amazing and awesome. So what I do is I'll go to a thesaurus. The thesaurus is my friend now in this step. And I try to find another word that's a lot more vivid. It says what I want to say in a much more specific way. So instead of saying awesome, I might, maybe I'll say brilliant or magnificent. Look for other words that might describe what you're saying in a better way. Don't do that for all the words, of course, then it would be overkill. But spice it up. Look for really powerful, vivid words. And then the third thing is invite your audience into the moment by you going there first and painting the scene. So I had you sitting on a bar stool in the afternoon in a Las Vegas casino, right? I had you in a coffee shop in the afternoon with Denise. So put people in a setting and then invite them in. One mistake people make with stories is they try to do this whole timeline chronologically leading up to the moment and just like the whole story. So when I used to tell my story that way, I would try to when I was this age, this happened, and then I did this, and then this happened the next year. Don't do that. Think about a moment. So when I was thinking about how do I tell my story, which is a very deep, heavy trauma story, and there's a lot more to it, but how do I tell it so that I don't lose people and what's the moment? What's the moment I want to bring them into? And that first day made sense to me. What's the moment you want to bring your audience into, the most significant moment in the story, and then paint the picture for them, invite them into that moment. And then you can always add in, if you need to add in details from before to give it context, then you can. But really paint a scene and bring people into a moment. And that will make your story really powerful. Okay, and then the next step is to speak, deliver it. So it's showtime. Here are...
Now, do you want a few questions before?
Yes, sure.
Section?
Yeah.
Okay. Mary Elaine says, what if you don't have clients?
Great question. If you don't have clients yet, you can do some research. You could talk to people that would be potential clients, see if they'll talk to you and ask them questions like, what's your top challenge in this area, whatever it is that, you do. So say you're a health coach, you could talk to somebody and say, what's your top challenge right now? What are you struggling with? And you can get their perspective that way without them having been a client. You can also read books. You can bring stories. You can say, hey, I read this story in this book, or you could do some research and say from research, here's a story that I found about this person that they went through this. So there's lots of ways to find stories even if you don't have current clients. Maybe even there's a friend that you helped, or somebody in your family that you were able to help with whatever it is that you do.
Mary Elaine has a sequel question. Can you write a testimonial from a target client if you are building a client base?
Do you mean can you use a testimonial as your story? I guess.
Mary Elaine, if you'd like to unmute and clarify your question.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. Yes. So can you write the story as part of a testimonial?
Sure.
From a quote unquote target client, if you're just building your target base, your client base?
Write the story as a testimonial or get a story from a testimonial?
Both, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes. Testimonials are great sources of stories. As a matter of fact, Denise's story All of that came out of her testimonial, because when I finished working with her, I kind of wrapped up our session. I was asking her these questions like, what do you feel now? And I had taken notes from when she started working with me. So I used her words in my story. So yes, testimonials are great places to build stories from your clients, and then use them in your testimonials. If your client, you may have, like, that would be long, but I could shorten Denise's story into like a paragraph testimonial. In fact, I think it is on my website, her story. So that's a great use of stories, is in testimonials on your website.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Indiana Forrest Jones wants to know, how long should your stories be?
Good question, Forrest. So it really depends on the situation. And this is something I teach my students, is how to take your story, same story, and insert it into your 60-second elevator pitch. It's possible to do, and expand it to a longer story if you're, say, interviewing on a podcast, or you are doing a video, or you're on a stage. You can take the same story structure and even these same techniques, and you can take their same story and make it short if you need to, or embellish it and make it longer. Depends on how you're using it.
I have no further questions for you. Back to you, Janelle.
Okay, great questions. All right, so now you want to deliver your story powerfully. So 4 simple techniques that anybody can use are these. The first is the power of the pause. One mistake I see, and I used to make it, and I still do sometimes if I'm not conscious and aware of it, is to just talk, and not leave any space. So when you're first learning, I recommend you go through your story that you've written or typed and find spaces to drop a pause. Usually it would be a place where you want them to grab hold of an idea. You want what you just said to really land. Pause. And the best way to do this is just count to 3. I just counted to 3. That's as long as the pause needs to be. And it seems, when you're speaking, like a very long time. But the listener, it's not very long. Powerful technique, because it gives people that place to stop and think and take it all in. Don't use it all the time, but find those spaces where it would be really powerful. And then if you're cutting out all the extra words, it's easier to pause. Also, use vocal variety. Do not just talk at one tempo and one pitch the whole time in one volume. You want your pitch to go up and down. You want your volume to go up and down. And you want your pace. So if there's a place in your story where things are really getting exciting, you can speed up your pace, and you can make your pitch go up, and you can even get louder, or if it's really a very important moment, you might want to bring it all down, slow it down, lower your pitch. So just use your vocal variety within the story where it makes sense, not just for the heck of it, but like strategically. And then get emotional. I've been talking about emotions. Emotions must be in your story, because you've got to connect to people's emotions. The best way to do that is to feel it yourself. That doesn't mean that you have to break down and just lose it on stage, but feel the moment. Bring yourself into that moment and allow yourself to feel it, even if you're talking about someone else. So when I tell this story about Denise, and I'm talking about her on that treadmill and just that heavy blanket, like, I can feel it. I can feel how hard that is to feel that, And so if I'm feeling it, I'm going to express it through my tone of voice, through my facial gestures, and because I'm feeling it. Now, I could tell that story and not connect to the emotion at all, and just kind of say, well, she was on a treadmill and she was just plodding along, and she felt this heavy weight on her, and she just really wasn't very happy. That's like telling it without emotion. But I tell it like she was on this treadmill, plodding along day after day. She just felt so old and depressed, like I can bring in the emotion. It's very important to do that so the listener can relate, because they're going to have the same emotions. And they will be like, yes, I have felt that. And the end of the story, when she's happy, and she's got her spit and fire back, and, bring that emotion in. You want to spend a lot of time developing the emotions throughout the story so that you can feel them and portray them and connect to your audience's emotions. And then shorten your sentences. And I mentioned this before by taking out the extra words, but think in terms of short phrases. And that will help you to create more action within the story, and it gives it more punch. So I might say, one afternoon, the age of 23, I'm sitting on a bar stool in Las Vegas. And I stop, right? And I just, these little short phrases so that you can yeah, you're right there with me. And it connects more to you, and you're anticipating what's going to happen next. If you string a lot of words together, you lose people. So short phrases, that was one of the biggest keys I learned to tell my story better, was keep it to short phrases. It really helped me a lot. And then practice, practice, practice.
You open for a question?
Sure.
Where do type A's go to tap into emotion in order to be good storytellers?
Well, even type A's have emotions. So that's where this piece right here is really important for anybody. But if you have trouble, and I was one that had a lot of trouble tapping into emotions, not because I'm a type A, but because I had shut down my emotions from my past, and I'd never been able to connect to emotions very well for all those years. And I remember, my friends would be crying in a movie, and my friends would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. I cry all the time." And I remember thinking, "Oh, I wish I could cry." But I do remember with the first time I told my story using these techniques on a stage in a live room, I felt it. It came I got choked up. I didn't weep and cry and lose it, but I choked up at the appropriate moment and was feeling the emotion, because I had allowed myself to sit with it and go there, and I used to before just tell it from up here instead of really going into the moment. So I would say, whether you're type A or you just maybe are embarrassed to show emotion or whatever, spend time practicing it. Record yourself with a video and practice going into that moment, whatever moment you've chosen. Put yourself there as if it's happening right now. And then consciously, what emotions was I feeling, or with that person? What would be the emotion? Bring it up and let yourself feel it. And then watch the video and see how you did. Or get in front of a test audience and ask them, did you feel the emotion? Now, I run a speaking club called Speaker Sisterhood, and this is one of the things that I really work on with my ladies, because I'm not feeling the emotion as the audience. And so I'll ask them, what were you feeling when you actually experienced this? Feel it with me right now. And it does take practice. I think it takes practice really for anybody. So it's not an easy thing to do in front of people at first. But if you do it and you record yourself and you see yourself on the video and you do it maybe in front of one or two people that you trust, you'll get used to it. And the more practice that you do, the more comfortable you are, the easier it gets to actually feel the emotion for a moment. And then, just ask for feedback and ask them, did you feel anything? And if they say, no, not really, then you need to go back and work some more on that. And then just rinse and repeat. Just keep practicing. It's actually a lot of fun to do this. I think it's really fun to let me learn how to tell this new story and get it to where it really comes from the heart. I was recently on a summit sharing my story, and I've shared my story a lot since I started sharing it. And this one summit, the interviewer was asking really great questions, but somehow in this moment, we both got to this place where we were both like tearing up. And I had to stop talking. And I was like, wow, I never could have done that before, even just a few years ago. And the reason I was able to do it then is because I've been practicing this. And I've been letting myself go to into those moments and feel it, and not feel like I'm just here to give you information. I was a teacher for many years and I could give information. I was really good at that. But I wanted to be a good speaker. I wanted to create an experience. And so I've been working on this. And if I can do it, you can do it too, really. And it doesn't take like this big emotional display. I'm not talking about that. It can be just a moment. But you'll feel the connection when you feel it inside, and they will too. And I don't mean pretend either, because I think people can pick up on that. So that's why it's really important for you to actually feel it for yourself.
No further questions. Back to you, Janelle.
All right, great. So we went through all 5 steps. I'm just going to go through them with you again really quick. Find your stories, start that story bank, start just writing down those ideas, pick out some to develop and put them into the 5 C's, the key elements. Make sure you've got a character, it's got conflict, there's a crisis, there's a change and a conclusion. Once you have all the elements, then go in there and start to polish it up, make it shine. You know, make those words really powerful. Take out all the extra stuff. Oops, sorry. Bring in the emotion. Make sure there's a setting. Then once you have it, start delivering it and just use the pause, you know, your vocal variety, bringing people into the moment, all the things I've been talking about, and just practice telling the story. Get up and walk around, get your body into it and your movement into it, and just like let yourself get into the story, and you will get to the point where it's just normal and natural for you to tell that story. I would say work on one story, get it down really, really good, and then develop another story. But just try one and get it really polished and where you want it to be, and try it out. And so with that in mind, is it okay if I go into my into my offer, Roger, or do we want to answer?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
This is from Shanice.
Okay.
Do you have multiple stories with different topics, or one story told multiple ways?
Yes and yes. You can you can have one, and I didn't touch on this, but like my mentor and Roger's pal too, Iman, he always says, never tell a story without a message, and never share your message without a story. So the message would be, you know, what is your marketing message, right? Like for me, it's building confidence in women. It's like you have so much to offer. Like that's a message, you know, your voice matters. So that's a message. And for me to really help my audience grab that and take it for themselves, I can show it in a story. So I could have one message that I tell a lot of different stories to show that message, right? So my core message, I could have lots of stories, or I could have one story that I could insert a lot of different messages into, depending, like I was sharing about my husband bringing home that dinner. I could make that story speak to different messages, or I could take my one message and come up with different stories to illustrate. So there's just a lot you can do. There's just
so a related implied question from Pavand.
Okay.
He is saying, I'm assuming one question for each niche market we have. I meant one story for each niche. So I think the question out of that is, do you have a particular story or set of stories for each niche market?
Oh, I gotcha. Yes. So that's the beauty of having several ready to go. And if you do have more than one niche market, I would start off, develop a good story for each one story each that you've developed and you've gotten down really, really well and you've crafted it. Then you can add in more later. But it does depend on your niche market, what story you're going to tell and what character and the conflict. It needs to relate to that niche, because it wouldn't make sense if I was talking about a guy who was running a marathon and got injured if I'm talking to women about confidence, right? I mean, I guess I could tie it in, but you do need your niche to relate to the story. So if you have more than one niche, you'll probably have, you could actually probably take one story, depending on the story, and craft it in such a way that it speaks to different audiences in a different way. But it just depends on the problem, the character and the problem and the outcome need to match the niche, because otherwise they won't connect.
No further questions. Back to you.
All right. Hopefully I answered that. Okay. All right. So I would like to invite you all to come to an event that I'm hosting here pretty soon. It is called Storytelling Mastery for Entrepreneurs. It's a 3-day event. So all that I shared with you in this last hour, or less than an hour, we will be diving into over 3 days. And we will actually be creating a story with you. So I know I gave you a lot there. So imagine like spending time really diving into all those techniques and all of the structure of the story, finding the stories and crafting it, and then practicing it. So you'll have time to practice it with each other. And the goal, my goal for you, is to come out of this event with a nice story, really put together well, that you've been able to practice, and you feel like you could leave the event and tell the story. That's my goal. So it's 3 days, February 18th through the 20th. And in this event, you will begin building your story bank. You will create a well-crafted, compelling story. You will have practiced it using some storytelling techniques. And we're also going to talk about how do you overcome stage fright and that nervousness so that you can own the room from any stage, wherever it might be. It could be one-on-one. It could be a small group. It could be a big group. It could be online. It could be in person. And then we also are going to, the last day, we're going to talk about strategies of places you can use your stories and all the different ways that you can amplify your message through story, whether it's, written through emails or short videos or in one-on-one conversations with a potential client or being interviewed on a podcast or like what I'm doing tonight or in a networking meeting, all these different ways that you can take your stories and put them out there to build your business and draw more people to you. So that's happening February 18th through the 20th. It's free. There is a VIP option. The VIP people will get all the recordings. They'll also get the downloadable templates I'm teaching and an extra session, bonus session about a week later where I'll do some advanced storytelling and we'll get more practice, and you'll actually get some feedback from me on the stories or the story that you were working on. So, and I think I'm also, another bonus is just 2 trainings I've developed that you just watch on your own, confidently speaking on video and confidently speaking on podcasts and summits. So there's some bonuses there. It's worth $47 for sure. This is the link if you want to register for the event, and you are definitely welcome to email me, Janelle@emerginglifecoaching.com, and my website is emerginglifecoaching.com. And I have really enjoyed sharing with you. I hope that you got a lot out of this.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle. We've got a couple of minutes if you have any last minute questions.
Those are some great questions.
I'm sorry. May I get the link to register, please?
I think it's in the chat.
If you go to the chat, you'll find it there.
Do you see it?
It's right above. Thank you, Janelle.
I see it right there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll type those links again so that they're current. Okay.
Awesome. Did I do that in the time allotted to me, Roger?
You did very well. That's why we've got a couple of minutes left for any
Nice.
unanswered questions or
Good.
unasked questions.
Yes, give me your questions.
How would you how would you suggest like filtering your questions, like your stories, like when should we know to be like it's personal or like reveal enough of our backstory without making it centered around us, because or like specifically like around me, like bringing it whole circle like you did.
Yes, that's a very important question and technique, because I used to not want to tell my story because of that. I didn't want it to be about me. I didn't want to make people feel bad or sad or whatever. So it took me a while to figure out how to do that. But I always remember when I'm telling my story that the reason I'm telling it is to show them the transformation afterwards, where I'm at now. And the reason I tell it is because I want them to understand why I do what I do. And if I keep that in my mind, it helps me. I know I'm taking them somewhere with my story. And I don't, like, that's why it's important to craft how much you're going to tell. So, I figured, okay, I'm going to take them into this scene. This is how much of it I'm going to tell. And then I'm going to jump to where I am today. So it's really being intentional about how you're going to put that together. But they do need to see where you've been through, what you've been through, and who you are, if it's significant to the message you're giving them or to the offer. Like for me, I'm wanting to build confidence in women, so I want to tell them why and how I spent years not being confident and how I've come to the place of being confident, so they know, oh, I can trust her. So I've got to tell that story. And I tried to not tell my story. I thought, well, that's just too heavy of a story. Why should I tell that story? But I've had so many people say, no, you have to tell your story. It's important to tell your story. And then I began to realize how important it is to be able to share your story. But then the skill comes in with how do you share it? How much of it do you share? And in kind of crafting it so that you've got a plan. You're not like wandering around talking forever. So,
Janelle, we've got a final raft of questions, so you need to answer them all short and sharp.
Okay.
Yara asks, you are so, oh, sorry, that's a statement. Ashok asks, how do you figure out your story will relate to a person or not?
Oh, good question. I think you have to really know your audience and what it is they're struggling with. And that takes some market research and just working with people, finding out what's the problem that they need help with, and then match the story to that.
Sumit asks, is there a difference in the storytelling technique if I'm trying to join a community online, like Reddit?
I think you'd still use, those are the basic story elements. I mean, people word them differently, but every story needs to have like those 5 elements in some fashion or form, no matter where you're telling the story. I'm not familiar with Reddit, but if you're telling a story in a social media platform, writing it, you still can use those same elements as well as if you're doing like a video.
Great. And Sarah, you want to come on mic and ask Janelle? Yours will be the last question. Over to you, Sarah.
Hi, Janelle. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really good. Actually, my question is a bit different. I want to advertise for a product that it's not my personal experience. It's not the things that I can imagine myself in a situation and have it connecting to the same products. Okay, let's say, for example, furniture or something, for example, cable, electrical devices, or something like that, something special rocket science things, or something like that. It's really hard to connect them with the stories, but I know the power of stories can boost your marketing goals. So my question is, how can I tell stories without having any real connection with that product? Okay, do you have any techniques to tell me? Thank you very much.
Sure. That's a really good question. So, if you don't have a personal connection with it, I would say try to find somebody who does, or you don't have to know them personally. You could even, maybe do some research and find out how this product really helped people. But I would also want to know why you're selling a product. I mean, what brought you to that, to sell that? Is it just a job you're doing, or, because people need to know your why. Why are you doing what you do? So if you're doing this as a job, find some kind of connection. Like, I enjoy helping people find what they want. Maybe you didn't struggle to get there, but like if it's furniture, I'm thinking of furniture. Let's say you're a furniture salesman. Well, you could tell a story of, this person came in once and I don't know, like for me, I went looking for a chair one time and it took me, I don't know how long, because I had to find the right chair. Like mine would be a great story for a furniture salesman to tell how they helped me. I always tell the story of when we went to buy a vacuum cleaner, and my husband wanted a Shark vacuum, and I wasn't impressed by them. I didn't think they would be very good. And so I tell the salesman that, and he starts telling me a story about his wife and how she loves the Shark. And he's showing me the Shark as he's telling the story. So if you have anybody past happy clients, that maybe use that product, you could tell that story. There's a way to find a story, even if you're not personally connected to it. That might take a little bit longer for me to tell you how to do that. So come to Storytelling Mastery.
Thank you. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Zara. Janelle, on behalf of EIN, thank you hugely. Storytelling is incredibly powerful, and very, very few entrepreneurs know how to infuse stories into what they say and what they write. And if they did, they would not have as much of the struggle as they do. So thank you hugely for really simplifying it, distilling it down to its core elements. And thank you also for the irresistible offer. Who could resist that?
Yes, thank you.
On behalf of EIN, we thank you hugely.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.